correct? Okay, I'm hitting live. Just give it a
Folks should
second.
mute your microphones.
Oh,
No.
okay. Sorry.
Everyone mute. Thank you.
And we're on.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:01. It's with great respect and humility we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snamo people. The Snamo people maintain a profound, unique, and spiritual connection through the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expression of reciprocity. It's also acknowledged that a number of us are meeting across the district in different areas, so thank you for that. We appreciate everyone's participation. Moving on to item 2, 3, and 4. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order of the agenda? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Anyone in opposition, please type in the chat box. Give you a second. Don't see any, thank you. Actually, sorry, let me go back. We need a motion to approve the agenda. Can I get a motion, please? Sorry, Trustee Barron. Second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Trustee O'Neill, all in favor? We'll do what we did last time. If anyone's opposed, please type in the comment box. Otherwise, we'll assume everyone's in the affirmative. So anyone opposed? Okay, sorry about that. Moving on. Item number 6, Miss Wood, I understand that you have a presentation for us this evening. Hopefully we can get Miss Wood. There she is.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, trustees, for this opportunity tonight. I also want to say a big thank you to Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh, Assistant Secretary Treasurer Maureen Hambley, Director of Finance Tanya Sutton, and Deputy Superintendent Tim Davey. All of them joined NDTA officers for a review of the preliminary budget last Friday. So in addition to being able to see it with you all on Wednesday night last week, we went over it with a lot of your staff on Friday, and it was a great opportunity for us to ask questions and to get a better understanding. Tonight is the NDTA's opportunity to present our concerns about the budget and our wishes. And so we're always up for providing some ongoing communication of our perception of what the board's up to and what we'd like to see the board get up to. And we are teachers, and so we're going to provide that in the format of descriptive feedback like you might see on a report card. So descriptive feedback is required to say what a student is doing well, what needs to be improved, and the next steps for learning. So what do we think is going well? A few things we like. Of course, we like the addition of the inclusion support teacher. It's important that the board recognizes that our classrooms are very complex and that students in those classrooms need support, and certainly an inclusion support teacher will help provide some of that. We like that the budget is laid out in a way that aligns with the board goals. And we also like that it seemed to be much easier to understand than it has been in past years. So all of those things are great. Areas for improvement. Of course, we're concerned about the reduction of FTE of 17 teachers, which includes reducing the number of counselors. And we also are concerned about the addition of yet another director of instruction. And we would also offer some suggestions, and I think trustees mentioned this last week too, that there doesn't seem to be any new money to address board goals in the strategic plan. So next steps. Now it's up to the board to ask questions and to talk about reallocation of funds and how they're going to meet the goals in their strategic plan. The document that you see before you has 2 of the goals that we believe align with some of the things that we are asking the board to consider. So the first goal on the document is the goal of continuous improvement of instruction and assessment. And if you look at the first bulleted item. We're talking about continuous improvement of student achievement. And in order to improve student achievement, we need to be able to address student needs. So certainly the inclusion support teacher is it's a good first step in that direction, but we need more supports. We need supports directly in schools, student support teachers, teacher librarians, English language learner teachers, counselors, and educational assistants. We think that we could use the CEF fund to provide that, and we have to do that by asking for more money in the CEF. The board has to stop padding the ratios by including positions that don't fit within those positions or within those ratios. So right now we have grievances to that effect that the board is trying to include teachers in the ratio that shouldn't be included there. And if we could reach some agreement there, we think then you would have more funding in the CEF to provide some of those non-enrolling positions. Because right now you're asking for less money than you're entitled to. We also asked the board to consider primary classrooms, and we have said this before, at least once last year, maybe the year before as well. Primary classrooms could use an EA in every primary classroom for the start of the school year, at least kindergarten classrooms we'd like you to consider. Primary students are challenging and exhibit challenging behavior that is too much for one adult to handle, at least at the beginning of the year, until students learn more appropriate ways of being in a group setting. Primary classrooms also require a lot more resources than other classrooms do, and teachers are paying for those resources out of pocket, and you've heard me say this before. When a primary teacher moves schools and you go into their classroom that they've left behind, it's stripped almost bare because everything that was in that classroom belonged to that primary teacher and is now going to a new school. When a brand new teacher goes into that classroom to teach and they haven't had years to build up those resources, then they are spending a lot of money out of pocket to try to make a classroom that is welcoming for students and that helps with student learning. If the board wants to improve opportunities for early intervention and learning, then the board needs to take responsibility for purchasing the resources required to do that. And they need to take responsibility for providing the environment that safely supports that learning. The second board goal that we'd like to talk about today is on the second half of the page. Thank you, Karen. The goal of creating safe, caring, and healthy learning and working environment that is inclusive of the diversity of our entire learning community. The board is making, or the proposed budget has a cut of a counselor position. If we want students to feel welcomed, safe, connected, and have a sense of belonging in their school, and if we want students to feel that there are 2 or more adults in their school who care about them, we need to provide more adults in the school for students to interact with. Counselors, teacher librarians, and student support teachers all work with students outside of their classroom teacher, and they can be that second adult. Cutting a counseling position and 16 other teaching positions doesn't get you any closer to that goal. It moves you further away. Another bullet under that goal is about increasing awareness and capacity in addressing mental health and wellness. We don't see any supports in this budget that would address the mental health and wellness issues that we've brought before you. There is one in the budget, and that is adding a director of instruction to coordinate the coordinators. Last week, Deputy Superintendent Tim Davies said that that was needed to provide workload relief for the assistant superintendents. When teachers have workload issues, they usually will go to their principal and ask for an EA, and typically that request is denied because there are not enough EAs to go around. We don't think that you should be spending money on a director of instruction. We think you should be spending money on hiring more EAs. If the board truly wants to address mental health issues, then we need to keep personnel as close to the classroom as we possibly can. There are other areas that I could comment on, but I'm going to keep it to those few. So the 3 big asks for us are considering more school-based personnel, teachers, including SSTs, teacher librarians, counselors, and also education assistants. We need more. Secondly, primary classrooms need support. They need educational assistance, and they need them additional to what is already provided for schools, so not just shuffling around the few EAs that are already in a school, and they need resources to make classrooms that are adequate for student learning. Thirdly, don't cut those 17 teachers. You have increasing enrollment. We shouldn't see decreasing staffing. Where's the money going to come from? Again, we think that you're under asking in the CEF currently. We think that you don't need to hire an additional director of instruction. And we also think that you could use the surplus currently to offset what you're concerned about with the CEF that we think we will be seeing in September. And so the surplus would simply be a buffer until that money comes in September. And that's my presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. I appreciate the presentation. Are there any trustees who have any questions of Ms. Wood? I'm not seeing any questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Wood.
Sorry, Chair
sorry.
Keller. I actually do have a question.
Go ahead, Trustee Stanley.
Thank you. So through the chair to Ms. Wood, I just want to clarify. I wanted to check, see if I understood what you were saying specifically about primary schools and EAs. In your request, did I hear? So what I hear is this: that looking at primary schools, it would be ideal to have one EA per classroom. However, you especially acknowledge the need for an EA in kindergarten, and especially in the first. Did you say like in the beginning or in the first month? I just want to make sure that I understood your hopes.
Thanks for the question. Kindergarten teachers are dealing with students who are not used to coming to school, and they don't have the behaviors that help them to be good citizens in a group setting. And we are seeing more and more violent behavior, in fact, coming from kindergarten students. Having an extra pair of hands, an extra set of eyes, an extra adult in that room will help to create a room that is safe for the teacher, for the EA, for the other students in the classroom, and safe for the students. You know, some of them are running away from school, for example. They're running out the door, and you are, as one adult, you can't be in all places at once. Some of them are hitting, kicking, biting, scratching other students, and as one adult in the classroom, you can't be every place at once. We believe that students will learn to self-regulate and to be better citizens, and that may happen more quickly than in some classrooms than in others, depending on the group dynamic and the behaviors that we're dealing with. And so it is possible that later on in the year that EA wouldn't be needed anymore. But right now, primary teachers and particularly kindergarten teachers are saying that they really need that support at the beginning of the year. And the other thing about kindergarten students is that we don't know who's walking through that door until they're there. And if it takes a week, 2 weeks, a month to get support into the classroom, oftentimes that's not too late, it's never too late, but a lot of issues could have been dealt with sooner if they had the support right at the beginning.
Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up, Trustee Stanley?
No, that clarified. Thank you very much.
Great. So we do have a speakers list. I'm going to double back now. I had the wrong window open. My apologies for that. So I'm going to go back to, looks like, no, actually, Trustee Stanley was the only question. Okay, thank you very much. So I'll ask one more time. Are there any further questions for Ms. Wood? Nothing heard. Okay, so we'll move on to, thank you again, Ms. Wood, to
Thank you.
Mr. Zver.
Thank you, trustees, chair,
Oh,
and
sorry, Mr. Zver. A question just came up as we were transferring over to you. Ms. Krog-Irving had a question for Ms. Wood. Would you like to ask your question? I think you're muted.
Yeah,
Jessica.
I'm just trying to unmute it.
There we go.
I was just wondering, would maybe some increased funding to Strong Start programs maybe help address and alleviate some of those issues and concerns that you're having with the kindergarten students?
I mean, it's possible, but Strong Start doesn't service all kindergarten students, and I'm not sure that there's a correlation between the students that need the support and the students that attend Strong Start. We don't have that data.
Did you have a follow-up, Jessica?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And sorry about, Trustee Berzovic, do you have your hand up? Did you have a question?
Because Ms. Kroger-Irving's question, or what your comment just made me wonder, how difficult through the chair to I suppose the deputy superintendent, would it be to get some of that tracking data of correlations between kids who have difficulties in that first year or the first half of that first year, and whether or not they've attended Strong Start?
So, Mr. Davey or staff, does someone want to take a shot at that?
Thank you. Through the chair, going back to Strong Start, students are registered through MyEd in their Strong Start years. I guess we could look at students who have attended Strong Start and correlation between any kindergarten students coming in, if there's data specific to behavioral needs of students entering kindergarten. Again, as Ms. Wood pointed out, a lot of these students are learning to socialize within that classroom environment, and most students would settle into a routine of understanding of classroom expectations, routines, and self-regulatory behaviors relatively quickly. So I think what we would have to be looking back on is if there's any data showing student incidents in the kindergarten level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And just as a reminder, my understanding is we should be asking questions to the presenter. So if we have other questions for tonight, we can bring them up as part of our budget discussion. Okay, so moving on, and I apologize, Mr. Veer. I believe it's your turn now, and I promise not to interrupt you this time.
No problem. Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the trustees and senior management and guests for allowing me to present tonight. Normally, I would put something up there that would probably ring numbers and cross-section, but as sitting through and working through COVID-19 and the unknowns of what September might bring, and having the opportunity to talk to the new Secretary, Mark Walsh, his team, of course, Maureen Hambley, Tanya Sutton, we, from our side, and our other executive members that were with me, are okay to say that if the direction of the board, based on the budget that was given to us, we can accept it the way it is going. We all want more. We'd all like to have a little bit extra put into the place. But based on the unknown, I know there's some cuts to EAs, but as the students come back in, more than likely there will be a need for them and they will bring funding. So as the funding increases, so will probably the objective of the EAs. Yes, there's always a need probably for some more facilities members, but as I said, during these unknown times and seeing that we're not facing any cuts because the other jobs that were on the table were put back into the preliminary budget. Yes, there's an increase to a director of instruction for which we're not agree with, but one job may make a change to somewhere else, but who do you cut to place somewhere else in there? Our desire would be to take what's there, hopefully with the surpluses that come in September, that we have an actual opportunity to work with the trustees, senior management, and possibly redirect some of that funding where areas might not have enough. Because I feel that the surplus is going to be quite large. And yes, we don't want to spend surpluses on ongoing employees or whatever, but I think those ongoing employees might be cut because we're trying to be supportive of possibly not hitting our targets. And when we do that, we don't necessarily aren't able to find people to maybe to come back in quick enough. So on the cautionary, I don't like to see too many layoffs, but I do believe there will be a large surplus that we can build from come September. And I hope that there's an openness and a willingness for the trustees and senior management to put some of that money back into the classrooms rather than put it away and say it's going to keep raining. That's all I have to present. I just hope you stay the line on this, because if there's changes coming, of course, that would change the way somebody would want to present or ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Veer. Are there any questions of Mr. Veer? Mr. Sveer, I apologize for ruining your last name there, Rob.
It's okay.
Hearing none, thank you to both our presenters for your presentations this evening. We'll move on to item 7, senior staff reports. Secretary Treasurer Walsh, would you like to proceed? Sorry, Mark, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this evening, and I just want to start off by expressing my appreciation for the opportunity to meet with the NDTA, to meet with CUPE, and to meet with our DPAC and have a discussion about the budget and the concerns of the groups. It's a great opportunity to get to meet everyone, but also to get the context of the district, as well as to hear what really the needs are on the ground level. So just want to express my appreciation right at the outset. This evening, I don't have too much to add, but I would like to bring to the board's attention, and I am the changes that we had expressed that we were going to be putting in the document. So if I could get Karen to bring up the presentation, the budget presentation, please. And if you could scroll down to page 16, please, Karen, of the budget presentation itself. It may be a different page in the agenda. So it's the community link page. So if you could go down 2 more. Perfect, that one. So trustees will recall that the preliminary budget document that was produced, we were recommending 2 changes that weren't reflected in the previous document. And so they're going to be reflected here. And so if you look, this is our community link budget, and you recall that the community link budget's in a deficit because of inflationary pressures and because we don't have a surplus from previous years in community link to spend. So we were recommending a couple of changes initially, and that was the removal of 2 foods program planner positions and a community school coordinator position to balance that budget, as well as to make an increase to reserve allocation to be able to spend extra dollars in September. As we noted, given the lack of time to consult on the changes, as well as the impact of COVID, we propose to not make those changes. And so this amended document, you'll see if you look under the 2021 year, you'll see the school foods planners are both back in the document. And if you go to the bottom, the reserve for support allocation has declined from the proposal. You do not see the school community coordinator, the 1 of 5, here in Community Link, where you will find it, or it's being funded or proposed to be funded through operating for the 2021 year. So just to be clear, those 3 positions are all in the overall budget, 2 in Community Link, 1 in operating. The other piece that I'd like to bring you to is our international progress student education program, which is 21 of the actual report, page 21. But I guess it would be page 23, Karen, on yours. Two more. Perfect. Yeah. So this, I think it's really important, and I apologize if I didn't explain what the suggested changes are here. So as noted during our presentation, we are recommending that we use 1.128 million of surplus to cover a deficit in the international student program. But it is very important to point out that of the 1.128 million, only approximately 300,000, a little bit over 300,000 is there to support staffing in the international student program. And what I mean by that is revenue from international student program brings in $849,000 more than it costs based off of 263 students. And so in order, if we decline to 67 students, we are actually losing money out of our operating fund. And because we're very confident that international students will come back, if not next year, the year after, what we're recommending is using surplus to essentially pad that particular blow this year. And so again, yes, it does have some funding for international student staff, but it also has funding for operating program that's just not the revenue. We don't have the revenue because of the lack of international students this year. So if we decided, for instance, to say there's no more international program, then staff would have to go away and find 849,000 from classrooms, from support for teachers, from district staff, etc., to be able to balance that budget. And so I think I maybe didn't explain it well enough last week that it's not 1.18 subsidizing international program. It's 1.128 subsidizing the revenue from international that goes into operating, as well as some of the expenses for the international program. So I thought those are the 2 points that I thought could use some clarification this week, and happy to answer any questions about any part of the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I see that we have a question from Trustee McKay. Go ahead, Trustee McKay.
Thank you. So one of the things that I guess I'm looking for confirmation on is that over the course of the last little while, learning more about the international student education program is essentially we bring in a significant amount of revenue that not only supports the program, but also adds positions and supplies into our operating budget that we wouldn't otherwise have. So if we were to cut those funds and not balance, like if, for example, if we chose not to put those funds in, we'd be facing further cuts, not actual savings. And so what our hope is that we will regain that student enrollment in that program, which will then allow us to have those monies within our operating budget. The cut would end up, essentially what I'm saying is, can you confirm that by having the program there, we bring in additional revenues that support our operating budget? If we cut those positions out of our budget, we're thereby also cutting operating expenses.
Yeah, well, so if we cut if international student programs bring revenue that fund non-international student expenses, absolutely. So if we went down to zero and we had no expenses related to international students and we had no international students, we'd have a deficit of $890,000. So even the 67 students that are there, yes, there's costs associated with keeping the program going. But ultimately, even those 67 students are there that are bringing positive revenues to the district. So if they were gone, we'd have three and a half teachers gone, and the 67 students. We'd have all of the money associated with all the staffing, plus we'd have the additional operating deficit to cover of 890.
Thank you, and Ms. McKay has a follow-up.
Okay, So I guess this is for discussion point for the board. Given everything that we've learned over the course of the past week around the International Student Program, and having a good understanding of the cultural opportunities that it provides and the relationships that get built between students that come here and our own students that live in our own communities, I support the work that we would undertake to float this program for the next little while, because the future is too uncertain for us to make any definitive decisions that might reduce our ability to bring in that income in the future. I think it's really important that we support this program. It took me a few days to figure out how I was feeling about that, you know, given all of our conversations, and I appreciate the detailed answers that Mr. Walsh has been able to provide us, but this is an area of the budget that I'm prepared to support for sure. So I appreciate you taking the time to explain that to us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh and Trustee McKay. We have a question from Trustee Stanley. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. So through the chair to Secretary Treasurer Walsh, in thinking about Ms. Wood's presentation, and having seen in another school district when we implemented the idea of having EAs in the first month or two in every kindergarten class, and seeing that was really successful when we implemented that in another school district. It was reported that, you know, startup was much smoother, and not only for families but and students, but teachers were reporting feeling a lot calmer in that process. So I because of that, I tend to like this idea, and I was thinking, oh well, we can address this later, maybe, but we can't, can we? So my question is that given that this particular request is an ask for the startup of a school year, is this time, meaning when we're proposing the budget, the only time that we can implement that kind of change, or is there any other opportunity to implement that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so if the board was to proceed to fund an additional, and I'm sorry, I don't know the number of kindergarten classes we have at the school district, but if the board was to proceed to fund that many additional EAs, then the budget at this point would be that time. If the district was going in a direction, and I'm sure Mr. Zver might have something to say about this, and perhaps Mr. Saywell would as well. I'm not sure if you say the idea of just reassigning all the EAs in September to cover K and then reassigning them after. I'm not even sure that's realistic or possible. That would be I guess the only other way you would do it outside of the budget cycle. The difficulty, of course, would be is that if you're hiring EAs for every single kindergarten class in September and then you don't need them anymore 4 months later, and I don't know what that number would be, is that would have a pretty big impact on your school year and your continuity across the system if you're laying off. Again, I don't know how many kindergarten classes there are, but that there would be an impact there. I'm not sure Mr. Saywell has something to add to that.
Mr. Saywell, did you want to add anything at this point?
Well, yeah, thank you. Good evening through the chair. Thank you for the question. And Secretary Treasurer Walsh is quite right. There's some other considerations that I would add, and that is, generally speaking, the pot of finances to support EAs is finite, and my preference is to not add EA time across the board. I mean, typically what we do is we add EA time or apply it where there's a need. And so I'm a little challenged by that recommendation, along with the suggestions that Secretary Walsh made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saywell. Trustee Stanley, did you have a follow-up to your question?
Kind of. I just hope that, I mean, I recognize that right now, perhaps this is a challenging notion to implement for this year. But having seen it being implemented and at least having it in that time being viewed as successful, I hope that this is a kind of a conversation that we can have in the future, or a consideration. So I'm thankful for Ms. Wood for bringing up this point, and I just hope that it's something that at least it can be a future conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Berzovich, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I agree with Trustee Stanley's comment that I would love to see this be a future conversation. Through the chair to Mr. Walsh, obviously not tonight, but at some point in the near future, could we get a hypothetical costing of a measure like that for the kindergarten EAs throughout the district? Would that be particularly onerous, or?
I have a point of order, Chair.
Oh, fair enough. I guess basically, I'm not necessarily directing you to do it. I'm just asking how onerous would it be to, if we were to ask you to do that? Let me rephrase the question. Would it be easy enough to get the data and do the calculation? Is it a long, drawn out process?
Through you, Chair, to get rough numbers, I would imagine that it wouldn't be an onerous task to get very specific numbers, more so, and I'd probably want to take that question away depending on the specificity of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Berzovich. Did you have a follow-up? Hearing none. Trustee McKay is next on my list.
Thank you. I don't know if I so much as have a, well, yeah, okay, this is a question. Thanks for letting me think that through. I'd like to confirm that in recent discussions that we had as a board with BCPC, you know, we sort of clarified around how boards spend their money. And I think that it sort of, we simplified it down to the confirmation of this. And I suppose I'm looking for Secretary Treasurer Walsh to confirm with me that this is my understanding. But essentially, you know, our funds come in from the ministry, and we utilize contracts on how we spend funds. And those funds are spent based on enrollment and then contract language to make sure that we're enrolling to the best of our ability, and then we add on a CEF type funding situation. So, like, is that essentially our process of how monies come in and how we expend the baseline of our operating budget?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for the most part, there is certainly flexibility in a couple of areas, and I think when we've looked through the budget and the FTE changes over the years, you note that the facilities department, for instance, has seen a continued decline, and that's one of the few areas that the board would have flexibility, because it doesn't have, you know, those ratios. It doesn't have contractual requirements for the most part. But yeah, so based off of class size, based off of contract language, and then based off of, like I said, that relatively minimal flexibility in spending.
Trustee McKay, would you like a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. And so to confirm then that we would utilize our operating budget funds and staff to our best enrollment projections. And come September, we will add staffing wherever our enrollment dictates that we should, correct?
Yes, there's no specific EA requirements, but certainly with respect to teachers, yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Zveer would like to ask a question. Mr. Zveer, please proceed.
Yeah, I'd like to respond just based on the letter of understandings I have with education assistants. We like to do our staffing at the end of June for 90% of them, or 95, with a small run in October. So trying to create a whole bunch of kindergarten jobs that are not going to be there does create a problem for us about how many extra people do we have? Do they become substitutes on our call out list and stuff? So it is problematic for us. Not that we know that there's a need, but the short-term needs could create some problems for us just in logistics. So.
Thank you, Mr. Zveer. I guess I'm on the list next here. So my question to perhaps Mr. Walsh or Mr. Saywell is, how are we resourcing our approach to COVID-19 to ensure that we're meeting ministry guidelines with respect to cleaning and sanitization and other requirements that we know of at this point?
Can I just confirm, Mr. Chair, are you saying what are you looking at in the budget, or what are we doing, say, for instance, like as we speak in schools or in June?
Yes, thank you. I'll clarify. So in the budget, I'm curious to learn more about how we're resourcing our response to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the things we're hearing about, like additional sanitation, and perhaps there are other things that we're planning for that may not quite be apparent in our budget.
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of ways. So one, we are proposing the COVID response fund, which is not specified to impact any specific area, because really what I think we're about to see, and thankfully June is going to happen the way that it's going to happen, because we're going to learn some lessons very quick on what our requirements are. So we have been allocating supplies budgets this year to be able to support the purchase of, curtains for the buses, sanitizers, those types of steps. What we realize now with the June return, and if that continues into September, we are going to need additional, or we can anticipate that we'll need additional custodial as an example. We're maintaining well on our technology. Whether that continues, if we're 2 days on, 2 days off, what September looks like. Luckily, we do have a local capital budget specifically for technology that we could access, so we don't necessarily need to add too much to that in the budget. And as we've noted, because we don't really have that exact knowledge, I think we can anticipate additional custodial time. What we will be coming back with, and I think to Mr. Zver's point that he made, we disagree how much we might have a surplus in September. In September, we'll be able to come back to the board and say, okay, we know now from our experience in June, we need 6 extra custodians, or whatever that number is. We need to set aside another 100,000 for supplies budgets, for cleaning supplies. We need to actually add more to the technology fund because we just run low, just didn't meet what we thought the needs were. And so besides the relatively small pot for the COVID response fund, just so it's there in the budget, you won't see those specific recommended allocations in the budget as you see it. Our intention is to come to the board in September based off our experience in June to say, okay, here's in the surplus where we need to reallocate. And if it's big, we may come back and say, actually within the budget, we need to make some changes as well, rather than just use the surplus, because if it's an ongoing expense, those types of discussions. But it's a little too early to say 8 more FTE in custodial, 2 more FTE in bus driving or what have you, because we just don't know the experience yet. And so we'd hire people we might not need, we'd hire them on a continuing basis. And so that's the idea of using the surplus in September. And if there's an emergency in July, and we know it already, we do have additional surplus funds to access that are the unrestricted surplus that we could access as well. I'm not sure Mr. Saywell has anything to add.
No, thank you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Walsh. That helped with my understanding. I don't see anybody else on our speakers list. I'll give it one more call here. Okay, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. We don't have any new business. Were there any questions, Ms. Matthews? No questions. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I suppose we'll move on. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Ms. McKay, Trustee McKay, sorry, and Trustee Stanley, any objections? No objections? Carried. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks,
I'm
Chair.
muted. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.